To change the course of nations, ideas are as powerful as guns. This is the story of two men of ideas, a right-wing prophet from Japan who preached the gospel of the sword, and China's greatest modern writer who attacked his nation in order to save it. Two very different men. Their dreams of nationalism would come true and then turn to nightmares, colliding with the force that led their two nations into war and gave birth to the Chinese Revolution. In 1966, Communist China was convulsed by the Cultural Revolution. All over the country, young Red Guards shook the red book of their leader, Mao Zedong. In fury, they cast out their elders and demanded single-minded devotion to the revolution. It was a time with only two official heroes, Mao Zedong and a writer who had died 30 years before, Lu Xun. Mao called Lu Xun a hero without parallel in our history, China's greatest revolutionary. For Mao believed that power flowed from the mind of the writer. Only a writer, armed with words and ideas, could imagine a way to build a new society by destroying China's old civilization. At the turn of the century, the decay of China's ancient civilization mocked its former glory. The Chinese people still wore queues, pigtails that were symbols of slavery to the ruling Qing dynasty. But the Qing government was corrupt, caring more about palace intrigues than modernizing the nation. In the coastal cities, the Western powers flaunted their power before a nation too weak and divided to resist them. Old superstitions and customs blocked efforts at reform. When discontent surfaced, law and order was maintained with extreme cruelty. A few tried to change their country. One was Lu Xun. He came from the town of Shaoxing in southeast China. Today, Shaoxing is a window on China at the turn of the century. A beautiful place scarred by poverty and decay. To Lu Xun, it was a symbolic town of rivers, which issued from China's past and flowed to China's future. At age 18, Lu Xun followed the rivers out of Shaoxing in search of a modern education in the big cities of Nanjing and Shanghai. Shanghai's river is the Yangtze, and it flows to the sea. Today, Shanghai is China's busiest port, linking it with the outside world. For Lu Xun, the outside world presented something totally different from China. The European gunboats that steamed upriver signaled a magical new realm of wealth and power. The row of old Western buildings that still faced the river was called the Bund. It was the heart of the Western presence in China. In 1902, the power and wealth of the foreign concessions awed and shamed Lu Xun. The West seemed to have something that China did not. Lu Xun was faced with a hard irony. To bring progress to China, he had no choice but to go abroad.
That was the first time that he was exposed to Western learning, to Western science. He became fascinated by Western ideas. But I think the West was kind of a wondrous universe. You know, it was almost like science fiction. Intellectually speaking, of course, Japan after Meiji was the place, the country. It was regarded as the window of Western learning.
In 1902, Lu Xun traveled to Tokyo. Like many other Asian scholars and writers, he was drawn to Japan because he saw in Tokyo's buildings and trains evidence that an Asian country could modernize. For Lu Xun, nothing was more modern than Western medicine. He enrolled in a medical school in the north of Japan. It was in this building at Sendai's Tohoku University where Lu Xun studied anatomy and biology. He was driven by the memory of his father who had died young, fed roots and crickets by a Chinese doctor who did not understand his father's disease.
Apparently his father had tuberculosis and he was vomiting blood. And Lu Xun, as a young kid, was summoned during the last moments to go through this ritual of calling out his father's name, you know, father and father. And finally his father sort of woke up and from his coma and said, "Shut up, you know, don't disturb me." And his father then sort of died peacefully. So Lu Xun said that this was the greatest trauma in his childhood. And he wanted to reenact, in medical terms, that whole episode, but this time as a Western doctor. So he will be able to cure patients like his father, who were victims of traditional Chinese medicine.
Western medicine was hard for Lu Xun. He was squeamish about blood, and the lectures in Japanese were difficult. Winter in Sendai was cold and lonely. Lu Xun was the only Chinese student in a town where Japanese troops shipped out to China to fight in the russo-japanese war.
After class, we would be shown news pictures of Japanese victories. There were also Chinese spies for the Russians who were captured by the Japanese and killed while other Chinese looked on. Banzai! The students clapped their hands and cheered. But to me, the cheering was jarring.
He suddenly felt alienated in the midst of a jingoistic Japanese crowd. The crowd of Chinese people were watching one of their own being executed, but they have no expression. If you have a face with no expression, you have no soul.
The slide convinced me that medical science was not so important after all. The people of a weak and backward country, however strong and healthy their bodies might be, could only be victims or witnesses of senseless horrors. The important thing, therefore, was to change their spirit.